There we go. That was a little bit weird getting over to there, but that's all right. I think this is all working. So, yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. Welcome to Code and Coffee. My name is Christopher Harrison. It's been a spell. It's been a little while since we've all been here. So I want to go ahead and say hi to everybody here in just a couple of minutes. But I do want to do a real quick introduction both on myself and really on what it is that we're going to be doing with like Code and Coffee all up and today in particular. So first up, let's talk about me. So my name is Christopher Harrison. I'm a senior program manager inside of Microsoft Cloud and AI. And my primary focus is around doing dev. It's really all around doing things like this and helping people get up and running inside of whatever it is that they're trying to do. And my primary focus is really around web dev. I've been doing web development for many years now, and it's by far my biggest passion when it comes to doing development. And so this particular show here, Code and Coffee, has a focus on web dev, but really it's about exploring. It's really about sort of just being a developer. And so what I typically do on this show is I'll typically build on some project. So we'll get in and we'll do something with Django, or we'll do something with Vue, or we'll do something with, who knows what. And in a couple of weeks, I really want to start up a project using React. And so we'll get in and we'll make mistakes and we'll learn together and really just walk through what it means to be a developer. Like we'll have that experience here. So that's normally what we do. But because of a couple little scheduling things, we're going to broadcast this week. We're not going to broadcast next week. And so as a result, we sort of have this little gap week here that I don't want to start a project that's going to take multiple weeks by doing a week, taking a week off, and then coming back. So with this little bonus week, I thought, hey, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the setup. That, one of the questions that I frequently get asked in chat is things like, how do you get WSL set up? Or how about Visual Studio Code? Or, what is it that you use? What are the tools that you use? And on top of that, one of the other big things that I wind up seeing is a lot of people that aren't necessarily familiar with one of the most common tools that you're going to be using as a modern day developer. And that's, of course, Git or GitHub if you're going to be publishing out. So I thought, hey, maybe we could spend a little bit of time doing that. Now, the thing that you're going to notice, if you haven't already picked up on this already, is this is very free form. So I have no script here. I have no teleprompter. I have no pre-canned demos or anything like that. So anything that you're going to be seeing here is going to be completely live. And so that means that I'm going to make mistakes. It means that things aren't necessarily going to work correctly. And it also means that I am going to be firing up documentation and taking a look at different things. Because again, this is what we as developers do. And that's what I'm trying to be here is I'm a developer. Hello, fellow students. So that's really what this is all about. And the other very big thing that this is all about is about you. It's about chat. It's about the audience. That if you have questions as we go through this, please ask. That the way that this works is by creating this synergy. So by all means, please ask questions. That's what makes all of this function. So not to put like pressure on you, but this is really what it's all about. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask. They could be on topic. topic, they could be off topic. Granted, if they're off topic, I probably won't be able to spend a whole lot of time on it, or maybe just like point at a real quick resource or otherwise. But please, please, please ask questions. Like this is what we're here for. And so as I had tweeted out earlier, that if you've got career questions, today's also a great day to ask those as well. So with that, let me go ahead and say good morning to chat here. I see a lot of friendly faces, familiar faces already back, which is fantastic. So good morning to Real Deal. Good morning to Julian. Good morning to Catherine. Good morning to Todd. Good morning to George. Good morning to Taylor. Good morning to Brandon. It's good to see you all here. It's good to see some of you back. It's absolutely fantastic. So please, please, please do go ahead and ask questions. That's what this is. That's what this is all about here. So fantastic. Okay. It does dawn on me. I've got a couple little things set up a bit weird inside of OBS. So my scene switching is going to be a little bit funny. I might wind up actually creating a scene on the fly. Let me go ahead and get over to here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. So I think I've got everything set up. Let me just double check. This looks good. My little coffee there, my Stream Deck there, although that's not properly configured. I'm still like getting back into the flow of things, I think, after a long break. This is actually my only my second stream in the last, 6 months or so, or 6 months, 6 weeks or so, something like that. It feels like forever. Feels like a long time since I've been here. So I apologize for any bit of clumsiness today. My coffee is here. So in my, there we go. My New York City Marathon mug. There we go. Take a sip of that. So cool. All right. So with that, the agenda for today is what it is that you see below. So the goal here is to chat about development, to chat about getting things set up, to chat about Git and GitHub and all of the various things that are available there. So as far as what kind of coffee Real Deal asks, I'm almost ashamed to admit this, but I actually had to switch to decaf maybe about 4 or 5 months ago. It was giving me really bad tinnitus, sadly, and so the coffee needed to go. So I still need that like hot bitter liquid. So I do still drink decaf, but yeah, it's decaf. It's actually the Starbucks Christmas blend decaf. So. Catherine asked the question, do I think programs like WordPress and Squarespace are affecting web developers' ability to get jobs? Boy, we're going to start right with the tough questions here. Let me do this. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Now I'm back. Sorry about that. Like I said, it's been a spell. There we go. Yeah, we'll play charades. No, sorry about that. Like I said, it's been a little bit of a spell here, and I didn't have OBS set up quite the way that I wanted it to, so I just needed to go in and do something there. So I apologize. Okay. So anyway, yeah, let's go back and ask go back to this question. So Catherine asked the question: do I think programs like WordPress, Squarespace are affecting developers' abilities to get jobs? And so this is the opinion of Christopher Harrison, and this is the opinion of nobody else. And my answer to that question is no. That Squarespace and WordPress and really like all of those no-code solutions, and there's a lot of them that are out there. And in fact, Microsoft creates a lot of them. That Power Apps is a no-code or so-called no-code solution. But there's two big things to keep in mind here. And the first of which is the concept of no-code in and of itself is a little bit of a misnomer. That even if you're dealing with like no code, there's still some level of code that's going to need to be created. Maybe it's through different formulas. Maybe it's through different like little extensions that you might be going in to add in and so forth. Like there is still some level of code that's going to be done there, and there's still going to need to be some level of expertise on how to do whatever it is that you're trying to do in WordPress or Power Apps or anything like that. So there is still some skill level that's going to be required, and there's going to still be some level of code that's going to be there. And as a real quick side note, I also want to make sure that I'm crystal clear about this. If you write code, you're a developer. Period. End of sentence. Now that we've settled that, let's go back and kind of talk about then, is this going to impact developer jobs? And my answer to that question is no, because the landscape for needing developers, for needing complex applications is huge. So that some of the different things that like Squarespace and WordPress and so forth can solve are honestly things that have been kind of solved anyway, things that are kind of routine and mundane, and things that you wouldn't necessarily want to be spending a lot of time building anyway as a developer. So the fact that those tools exist is honestly just fine, because it frees us up then to focus in on the more complex problems. And that's really where we as developers kind of want to be anyway. And so there's always going to be bigger challenges than, say, WordPress or Squarespace are going to be able to solve. And that's where we as developers who really want to start building things from scratch come into play. So do I think that it's going to have an impact? My answer to that question is generally no. So, and again, Christopher Harrison's opinion, that's nobody else's opinion there. So yeah, Jose says sometimes I should pair program with someone of the community. It's an interesting thought. There's another show that is run by somebody else in a different org, where what they do is they bring somebody on and they'll do some sort of a pair program specifically around identity. So they'll actually have somebody bring like an application and go, hey, here's how you can add identity in there using Azure authentication, which I think is kind of neat. It's a neat concept. So I'll definitely have to explore that. So yeah. Cool. Anybody here watch Dr. Stone? I do not watch Dr. Stone. So, yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So let's go ahead and this. There we go. All right. So again, obviously ask questions. I will answer all questions. So by all means, Feel free to ask questions. Okay, so let's start a little bit by okay, let's go back here. There we go. Okay, so Todd asked the question, what do I think would be the top 5 projects for developers to have on their portfolio who are looking to get into professional development? So, again, Christopher Harrison speaking here. When I'm doing an interview, when I'm looking at a candidate, I don't show up with a checklist that I'm not looking for, oh, you need to have done this, this, and this. I'm not looking for, I'm also not looking for somebody to be able to answer algorithm questions, which is a huge peeve of mine, is the modern coding interview that focuses so heavily on algorithms that really drives me crazy, and that's something else that I don't do in an interview, and so it's not what I'm looking for. So there's no real like checklist. So there's not like a top 5 list or anything like that I can give. But what I can say is this: here's what I'm looking for. For somebody who is new to industry, be they a traditional student, so they've gone to a 4-year school, or be it a non-traditional where maybe they've gone through a boot camp or they've done some level of self-training, is I'm always looking for, first and foremost, what did you do beyond the scope of what you needed to do? So if you're going to a university, I'm going to focus in on that just to make my answer a little bit easier. If you're going to a university and you're going to graduate, you have this set of requirements to go get your degree. And I'm going to assume, since you're in college or maybe just graduated, that you fulfilled those requirements. And that's fantastic. And stay in school, go get a degree, go do all of those things. And so now I know that much. But what I'm really looking for is not just did you do that, but did you go beyond that? So I'm looking for internships. I'm looking for maybe hackathon projects, contests that maybe you that you entered. I'm looking for side projects that maybe you did by yourself. That I talked to a lot of candidates where they maybe toyed around with starting their own company. And maybe it didn't really go anywhere. Maybe it was just, a couple months of just going in and having fun and building something and something like that. And that still counts in my eyes, because again, they've gone beyond what it is that they needed to do. So that's the first big thing that I'm looking for. And then beyond that, I'm really looking for skills. So what I want you to be able to demonstrate to me is, do you know the language that you're coming in and saying that you know? So if you're saying that you know JavaScript, if you're saying that you know Python, do you know that? The second thing that I'm looking for, and I'll go specific to web dev, is, are you familiar with like the overall architecture? Like, are you familiar with REST calls and API calls and those types of things? And then beyond that, are you also familiar with, making basic database calls? So are you familiar with, say, NoSQL and MongoDB? Are you familiar with a relational database and making select statements? Because all of those things are things that you need to know as a developer. Are you familiar with at least like one framework? And I don't really even care what it is. It could even be jQuery to a certain extent. But like, are you familiar with a framework? And so when it comes to the projects, that's really what I'm going to be looking for. Is I'm looking for you to demonstrate that you've done something like that. So there isn't necessarily a like top 5 list or a very specific, hey, you need to do this. But if I'm going to look at your portfolio, I want to make sure And I want to see that you've done something with real world tools and real world frameworks. So it could be something that you've built on React. It could be something that you've built on Vue. It could be using APIs that you've built. It could be using third-party APIs. All of that's fine. But I really just want to see, have you done this, and can you demonstrate that you can do this? So that's really my answer to that. So there isn't necessarily a top 5, but just have a couple of projects that you can use to prove that, yes, I know how to do this. That's really what I'm looking for, again, when I go in to interview somebody. What's the least number of years of coding experience that I've seen somebody hired without a CS degree? And this is a question from Fiction Free. And the answer to that is, relatively, relatively small as far as like number of years go. So, but part of that is skewed. So one of the programs that we have inside of Microsoft is a little thing called the Leaper program. And LEAP stands for something, LEAP. It stands for something that I don't remember what it is. But it's an internship program that's specifically geared towards non-traditional backgrounds. So what they'll do is they'll find people who maybe have a degree in something else, or maybe they're a couple of years out of high school and, they worked in, fill in whatever industry it is here. And now they've decided, hey, I want to get in and start doing some computer work. And so we actually work with an external company, an external organization who will find the appropriate candidates. They'll put them through a shortened boot camp, and then they'll hand them over to us as interns. And then we'll have them as an intern for some length of time. I think it's 6 months. It could be longer. It could be shorter. Don't quote me on the specifics there. But then we'll go ahead and work with them. And the guarantee that they'll get at the end of that is they're guaranteed an interview. Which in and of itself is huge. So they're not guaranteed a position, but they are guaranteed an interview, which is spectacular. And I've seen a lot of great talent come out of that program. And these are typically people who have not necessarily had a lot of coding experience and didn't have a CS degree. So there isn't necessarily like a set number of years. That this isn't like becoming an airline pilot where you need a set number of hours as the pilot in command. That really what you need to be able to do is, again, just demonstrate, hey, I know what it is that I'm talking about. Now, again, obviously, there is some correlation that the more experience that you have, generally speaking, the more you're going to know. And so having more experience is certainly going to help. But there isn't necessarily a set limit of, oh, you need to have been doing this for at least 6 months or anything like that. What's an example of one of my best hires? Gosh. Sadly, I really don't. So I don't have an answer to that. So I'm not. I don't manage people. I'm not a people manager. So I don't have anybody that necessarily reports into me from a technical perspective. So I don't really have a great example of that. The last person that I interviewed that got hired into a team that I work on, this was probably about 2 years ago, and she had gone through an intern program inside of Microsoft, and then we had brought her in full time, and she was spectacular. And the biggest thing that she brought to the table, and this is, I think, the way that I'm going to answer this question, is she brought in a real passion for learning and a real passion for wanting to go in and explore and try new things. And if you're new to industry, or even if you're in industry for 20 years, you need to still have that. And that I think is probably one of the biggest indicators about whether or not somebody's going to be successful in this industry, is if they want to keep learning, because things are constantly changing, that there's constantly new frameworks, there's constantly new languages, and the days of being able to just go in and be a COBOL developer or just be a C developer and then that's it, are long since gone. That you need to know multiple languages, you need to know multiple frameworks, or at the very least, you need to just be familiar with them. And in order to do that, you need to have some level of a passion for learning. And so that's really the biggest thing that I'm looking for. And generally speaking, the people that I see succeed the most are the ones that have that. So that's from Real Deal. Charles has seen some most junior dev advertise that they need one or two. Oh, okay. So Charles asked this question, and boy, I wish I had a good answer for it. Charles says that he's seen some of the most junior web dev positions advertised, saying that they need at least 1 or 2 years of experience, and how to deal with that if you're self-taught. So one of the things that happens quite frequently, and you see this so often, where, looking for a junior developer, 5 years of experience, must know C, C++, COBOL, Java, and all of this, and those certainly do exist. And sadly, a lot of that, at least in my experience, and again, Christopher Harrison opinion here, is either because they've just taken a boilerplate job posting and just like copied and pasted it and just updated a couple of things and then, that was it. Or it's being put out there by, and I don't want to make a blanket statement about HR in general. So please do not take this as oh my gosh, Christopher is saying that human resources are terrible and anything like that, because that's not what I'm saying. But one of the things that does happen is there is a little bit of a of like an automatic filter that does tend to happen for resumes. And a lot of that is just because of the sheer number of resumes that one particular job offering can wind up having. And so they'll put up like that little bit of a gate that you need at least, X number of years of experience, just because what they're trying to do is just give themselves an automatic filter. And it's, yeah, it is what it is. So how do you get past that then? Number one, still apply. Like, just because you see that, or just because you look at a job posting and you don't necessarily meet the minimum requirements, still apply, still do that. How do you then demonstrate that you have some level of experience? Certification is certainly one way that you can get in and do that. And I'm not just saying that because we at Microsoft have a huge set of certifications that are available, but that is one way that you can demonstrate that you have that, is to go out and achieve a certification, especially because that's going to be another big thing that you'll see in a lot of job postings, that they'll look for some level of certification. So if you can show that you have that, then that's fantastic, and that can help get you in the door. The second thing would be to have some level of a portfolio. So, if you are self-taught, generally speaking, you're going to be self-taught where you'll have built something. So demonstrate that. And, maybe what you can do is you can find a couple of, very simple little contract gigs with like friends or friends of friends or something like that, where you build a project for them and then show that. So, maybe you can do that as a way to pad your resume and to show that, hey, you have some level of experience. But I think number one, and Brandon, it makes the exact point, is, requiring 8 years of experience for something that's 3 years old. Just go ahead and apply anyway. Just go ahead ahead and do it. Asherad asked the question, how do I suggest to get started in building UIs when you've worked as a backend dev for most of the time of your career? Start building it. That there's a podcast host, TV personality, former writer for the Washington Post, by the name of Tony Kornheiser. He's one of my favorites to listen to podcast wise, and he says that people will often ask him, how do I start writing longer articles? How do you start writing longer pieces? And his answer is, start writing longer pieces. And so that's my exact advice here. How do you get into doing UI development? Start writing UIs that just find something that you want to build and go at it. Now, to get a little bit more specific, what I always recommend whenever you're trying to get into something new is try and connect it to something that you enjoy, something that you personally have fun with. So the way that I got into web development was by creating a website for my fantasy football league. And if you're not familiar with fantasy football, it's basically just a bunch of geeks that get together and they draft players and put together fictional football teams and play against one another, and away you go from there. And so I built a website for that. And it was actually fantastic because it was incredibly complex, as it turned out, because it required that I work with databases and a lot of like business logic, especially for things like how to manage trades. And I had to build a UI, and it had to be simple enough for people to be able to understand, and things like that. So that there was a lot that went into the project itself, but also because of the fact that I was super interested in fantasy football, it just kept me engaged. Yeah, Brandon has the perfect. Yeah, it's D&D for sports. That it kept me engaged, and so it kept me interested, and it gave me something to continue to build towards. So that's really it. It's like, find something that you like, and then just build something for that. But that's really the key is, you want to write longer articles, write longer articles. You want to walk more, you want to run more, walk more, run more. If you want to build UIs, go build UIs. That's really going to be it. So yeah. Real deal. Catching worms is generally not the goal of fishing, or at least so I've been told. So Jasmine asked the question, do I have thoughts on coding bootcamps? And my short answer to the question is I'm perfectly cool with coding bootcamps, and some of the people that I work with, some of the best people that I work with, all went to coding bootcamps. And what coding bootcamps give you the ability to do is to learn something in a very short period of time. And typically, they're going to have some level of connection to help you get that first interview, to help you get that first job, to help you launch your career. And so all of that is super valuable and extremely helpful. So boot camps can be fantastic. And I think if that's the direction that you want to go, then absolutely 100% go with it. Now, if you're noticing any level of hesitation in my voice, it's only because of this. Is just like, anything. Not all boot camps are built the same. So you really do need to do your research. So talk to graduates of the boot camp and see what their thoughts are. Ask for the syllabus. Look at the syllabus. If you have friends that are already in the industry, have them go look at the syllabus and have them give you a thumbs up, thumbs down on it as to whether or not it's appropriate and applicable. And then on top of that, and this is really the bigger thing here, is look at the financials. That there's a lot of schools that are out there, and Fortunately, here in the US anyway, there's been a pretty large crackdown on a lot of predatory schools where their primary goal is really just to get your money and not necessarily teach you anything. So, do spend a little bit of time looking at the financials and make sure that not only is it affordable in general, but it is something that you can afford. And if it is something where you're going to go into debt, be careful about that. Just make sure that is something that you are able to manage. That from my own personal experience, and I've talked about this in the past, that I wound up going to an associate's. I got an associate's degree at, honestly, in a lot of ways, sort of a bit of a predatory school. And I wound up going something like $15,000 in debt. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but this was back in the late 90s. And so $15,000 in the late 90s was a fair bit of money. I mean, it still is a fair bit of money today, but it's, an even larger amount of money back then. And I got lucky that I did manage to find a couple of jobs and then launch my career, and then eventually we were able to pay off that debt. But I got lucky. So you do need to be very careful about that. So my answer is, not all coding bootcamps are created equal. There are some that are out there, and I'm not going to name names here on either side, just because I don't want to either give recommendations or give anybody a bad name or anything like that. But there's some that are out there that are fantastic and that I'm huge fans of. And then there are some that I'm not really keen on, that I think that they fall on the wrong side. So coding bootcamps, as a general rule, I'm a fan, but again, you do have to just be a little bit careful. So yeah. Cool. And Taylor mentions that he's a boot camper and is really happy with the one that they chose. And absolutely, yeah. So just be careful, but there's a lot of great ones. There's a lot of great ones that are out there. And I also want, this is the last thing I'm going to say about this. So the other thing that I also want to highlight is, as a global message to everybody, never judge anybody who went to boot camp. That one of the things that I see in this industry, and it drives me crazy, is gatekeepers. And there are people who will look down on somebody who went to a boot camp, and that flames. It drives me absolutely crazy because, like I said at the top of this particular topic, I've worked with some amazing developers who went to boot camps. So in no way, shape, or form ever fall into that trap. I've worked with people who went to boot camps who were great developers. I've worked with people who went to boot camps who weren't great developers. I've worked with people who went to, Ivy League or near Ivy League schools who were great developers. And I've worked with developers who went to those level of schools who were not great developers. So judge the person, not the background. Okay. And I'll leave it at that. Survey 2 asked the question, should a front-end developer know any of the back-end stuff? And the answer is yes. And that includes both sides of it. So it's really hard in today's world, even if you're working in a very large organization, to be completely siloed. So you're very rarely, if ever, only going to be working just on a front end where the back end is going to be complete vacuum to you, that they're a complete black box to you. You're just not going to know anything about that. And the exact same thing is true on the other side, that you're never going to be a back-end developer where you don't know at least something about the front end. So I absolutely do recommend that you know both sides of it, because it's also just going to make you a better developer. Because if you understand how the back end works, as a front-end developer, it's going to allow you to, write better code. It's going to allow you to better understand how things work and why, more importantly, why things work in the way that that they work. So should a front-end developer know any of the back-end stuff? Absolutely, 100%. Should the back-end developer know how the front-end works? Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, you really do want to know that back and forth. Is there anything you can do right now to help Microsoft with the coronavirus? I wish. So yeah, I don't know exactly what it is that Microsoft is doing when it comes to the coronavirus. So I'm just going to pass on that question. So yeah. Yeah, and real deal, when it comes to, front end, back end, does make a very good point that, it could lead to a job. You're absolutely right, because, for me personally, I've done a lot of different things in my career that I primarily have been a web developer, that this is very much where I've spent the vast majority of my time is in doing web dev. But I also did an awful lot of SharePoint development. I've also done a lot of SQL development. I've done like a little bit of NoSQL, NoSQL, and things like that. And all of that little bits of experience has helped me learn other things. So, for example, in fact, we were talking about this just last night on the other show that I host called Web Wednesday, where we were talking with somebody about identity. And the way that I understand how OAuth and OpenID works at a relatively high level is because of my experience with SharePoint. Because SharePoint had single sign-on, which is based on a very similar model to OAuth or OpenID. So because of the fact that I had that experience, it then allowed me to better understand how identity works in today's day and age. So like having more experience about how more services work is never, ever, ever going to be a bad thing. So 100%, learn all the things. Go play with all of the things. So yeah. So cool. Other questions? I'm not going to kick over to the other screen here just because it seems like in the past there'd be a little bit of a pause and then somebody will ask a great question. So I'm just like pausing here, see for a great question here. So all of this is really good. I love chatting about this. So if you've got questions, now is the perfect time. How do I go about learning new technologies? I sort of answered this earlier, but really it's, do the things. Find something that you're interested in and go in and do it. That I mentioned earlier, the way that I learned doing web development is by creating a website for my fantasy football league. And so what that gave me is it gave me a challenge. It gave me something that I really love, and then I started building on that. And so just do the thing, get in and start practicing it. The other thing that I will also do, and I find myself doing this quite a bit, is what I will do is I will again approach it with how would I do X? So when I wanted to learn React a little bit ago, the way that I approached it is I want to build something. And so it was something small. It was just like a little recipe manager. So how do I do that with React? And so I went in and just did that. And that was the way that I learned it. But the other very big thing that I focus in on, and part of this is just because of the job role that I have, but I think that this is a skill that everybody should have, is I learned something, and whenever I learn something, I'm always thinking about how would I teach it to somebody else. And I find that by doing that, it makes it easier for me to learn, because in order for you to be able to explain something to somebody else, you need to know it pretty well. That there's an old saying that's sort of summarized and assigned to Einstein. But again, code attributions when it comes to anybody famous like that. Who knows whether or not it's true? But I still like the spirit of it. Is that in order to explain something simply, you need to know it extremely well. And that really is sort of how I approach a lot of new technologies, where I just need to be able to understand a little bit of it. It's like, okay, well, how would I teach that to somebody else? And so that really allows me to sort of dig in. And it also a lot of times will bring up other questions, because I'll go, oh, somebody is going to ask this. So let me go in and try and figure that out as well. So that's a big way that I'll go in and do that. So thank you, Rita. Ritu, that was a great question. So you want to ask the question, what's an example of a problem-solving question for a junior web dev? So part of it's going to be coding algorithms. So sadly, go memorize the coding algorithms. When I'm interviewing somebody, what I will go with is I will give them a scenario, and then I will start to have them sketch out different things. I will have them, maybe start to choose frameworks, and then maybe we'll start to drill into implementing like one particular feature, and like how would we go in and do that. So for example, I might say, hey, let's just use the recipe manager as an example there. It's like, okay, so you want to create a recipe manager. How would we do this? And so we would sort of sketch out at a very high level. Okay, well, we want a website where we're going to have a list of recipes, and we're going to want somebody to be able to click on a recipe and see different items here. And we're also going to want to be able to add in an add button. Like, oh, okay, cool. That's neat. So what about being able to share a recipe? How would we go in and do that? So now we start to get into a little bit more about the design and how are we going to allow to share that. So now we start to get into things like, oh, well, we're going to need an ID inside of the URL. So that way somebody can very easily share that out with somebody else. Oh, okay, cool. So now let's get in and let's do a little bit of pseudocode. How are we going to do that? What's a little bit of pseudocode that we might have there to go get the ID then from the query string, and then make the appropriate REST call to go in and get that. Oh, okay, cool. So now that we've done that, let's go in and say, look at how we might turn this into a single page app. So now we want to make sure that URL is going to bring up the appropriate state inside of the single page app, as opposed to bringing up a particular page. And now let's go in and do that. So now let's maybe go in and look at a router, and now what does that code look like? So that's really the way that I like to try and approach my interviews. Is let's have a conversation about something, and let's sort of like try and build something together, just like with a very, little bit of basic sketching out on a whiteboard. Maybe we'll go ahead and fire up an editor and we'll write, a little bit of code in there and things like that. And so that's really what I would ask. And everybody has their own sort of like go-to questions and things like that when it comes to interviews and their own style. But that's mine, because I sort of have this theory that, once we've had that initial conversation and I've looked at your resume and I've asked you, a couple of very basic filtering questions, and I determine that, hey, you know what, this candidate knows Python. Let's say it's like, okay, cool. Python. Now what I want to know is what's your thought process like? Like how do you think through things? And that's really what I'm looking for from there. Because in all of my experience, I've never come across a problem where it could be solved by the person who best knew how to write a bubble sort. That has literally never happened. So what I'm really looking for is, what's your thought process? If you're given a challenge, how would we approach that? And let's go in and let's start building a little bit. That's really what I'm looking for there. How do I, Ashwad asked the question, how do I suggest handling the pressure to become a full stack dev? So I'm not sure that I necessarily understand the question about the pressure. So if you want to elaborate a little bit on that, I'll be happy to come back to that. What does exactly a full stack developer do? As soon as I know, I'll let you know. No, I'm kidding. So a full stack is the general term for somebody who does both the front end as well as the back end of an application, or at the very least knows about both the front end and the back end of an application. And I would say in 2021, you need to be some level of a full stack developer. And we were talking a little bit about this earlier, where you really do need to know about how both sides work in order for that to, in order to succeed, I think, in this industry. So that's what a full stack developer does. Yossi asked the question, what does web developer mean? If the application is web browser based, is that enough? Are there certain technologies that you should know? Okay, so web developer just in general is somebody who, generally speaking, is programming something that's going to run inside of a browser or inside of a browser-like device. And the reason that I say something like a browser-like device is because there's a lot of different like hosts that can run applications inside of it. And there's a name that I'm just blanking on right now. Yeah, anyway, it'll come to me later. But anyway, that's basically it. So it's somebody who's going to write for that. Technologies that you should know, JavaScript. You have to know JavaScript. Period. End of sentence. And in fact, if I was going to put together a three things that a web developer needs to know if they're going to go in and start doing web dev, number one is you need to know JavaScript, and I'm going to assume HTML and CSS is part of that as well, because you can't do anything browser based without HTML and CSS. So HTML, CSS, but more particularly JavaScript for purposes of our conversation. So that's number one. Number two is you need to know a framework. That again, in 2021, you just cannot be a web developer without knowing some front end framework, and I don't care which one it is. If it's Vue, if it's React, if it's Angular, any one of them, because. And maybe I'll get in a little bit of trouble for saying this, but in a lot of ways, they all do the same thing. They all do it very differently. They all have their own different opinions, and they all have their own different approaches, but they all do the same thing. So learn one. So JavaScript, a front-end framework, and then learn some form of a back-end framework. Again, kind of going back to you really do need to know both sides. And so that could be, again, if you decide I'm just going to stick with JavaScript, that could be that I'm going to get in and learn Express and go that route. Or, maybe you decide to stretch yourself, and so you add on Python, and maybe you start doing Flask or something like that. But you need to know some level of back-end. So again, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, front-end framework, pick one that you like, and then some form of a back-end framework. And again, Express would fit the bill right there. So at a bare minimum, that's what you should go off and go learn. So the follow-up to the pressure of becoming a full stack developer. So more learning all the UI basics with learning a framework in a short period of time. Okay. So here's the way that I'm going to approach this question. So one of the challenges that web developers face in in the modern world is there's a plethora of frameworks, and it seems like there's constantly new ones being created. In the time that we've been streaming here, so roughly about an hour now, there's probably been 5 new frameworks that have been published out. I'm exaggerating, but maybe not by a lot. And so it really can become very intimidating. And it can become very confusing to know, okay, well, which one should I pick? And should I learn multiple? And how deeply should I know them? And so forth. So let me answer it this way. There's a very good friend of mine who has this philosophy of not learning anything until he needs it. And I think that there's a lot of truth there. That I don't know Svelte. I don't know Angular. Although I sort of know Angular, but I'll openly admit that my Angular experience is very dated. So I don't know. I really don't know Angular. I don't know Angular. I don't know Svelte. I know Vue pretty well. And I know a bit about React. Like I know just enough about React to create some basic applications. So those are the ones that I know. And at some point, just because of the nature of my job, I will go in and I will learn Svelte and I will learn Angular, because at some point I'm going to need to teach those to other people. But as far as like real world development goes, there's no pressure to necessarily learn a framework that you're not using. That what I would suggest is exactly what I suggested earlier, is pick a framework, learn that framework. So maybe learn Vue. And this is one spot where I am going to take a little bit of an opinion. One of the things I really like about Vue is that as compared to React and Angular, although I've heard Svelte is actually relatively easy to get into. But specific to Vue, Vue has a relatively low learning curve. That it's approachable in a way that like React and Angular isn't necessarily for new developers. And so get in and learn that one. Because what you're going to learn when you get in and learn Vue is obviously the framework, but you're also going to learn an awful lot about what all of those frameworks do. Like I said earlier, all of these frameworks do the same thing. They do it different ways. They have their own different opinions, but they're all doing roughly the same thing. And so once you learn one, it then makes it easier for you to learn others. Now, certainly, yes, you're going to have to go in with an open mind. You're going to have to go, oh, okay, it behaves differently here. And you're going to have to be very careful to avoid the, oh, that's awful, I don't like that. That you're just going to have to sort of accept, okay, well, that's the way that React does things, and I'm just going to go with that and go from there. Or you're just going to have to accept that that's the way that Angular does things and just go with that. So you'll have to maybe like, kind of relearn some things and so forth, but it's still going to make it much more approachable. So like pick one, go with it, and then start to add on the others. And what I would suggest after you've learned one is go become at least familiar with some of the others. So, maybe just take a couple of days and, go through the tutorials on fill-in framework here, just so that way you're at least familiar with what it is that you can do. So that way you can at least just like talk intelligently about it, but you're not necessarily all in on the technology itself. So that's really it. So learn one framework, go all in on one framework, and then start to get a little bit of experience with other frameworks. So I think that answers your question. I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to go ahead and follow up. Do I have any side projects that give me money? Jose asks. The answer to that question is no. I'm full time for Microsoft. Do I have any programming courses? I do. Oh, why can I not think of the URL off the top of my head? Give me, actually, there's a bunch here. Actually, you know what? Let me do this. Just gonna do this. So there's a bunch of great videos that are out here. The couple that I would highlight, there we go, is there's one for JavaScript. Yep. Here is one for Node. And let me. So I'm just pulling up. There you go. Okay, so there's a bunch of content for you. So I pasted in a link to the All Up YouTube page with just like a whole bunch of great learning videos, and then I went specifically to the JavaScript, to the Node, and then to the text-based version. So hopefully that'll answer your. That'll answer your question. Assured says really helps. Good. I'm glad. Yeah, it certainly can feel very intimidating when getting started, and especially because people will have so many different opinions that people will get like really, really gung ho about, hey, you have to use Angular, or hey, you have to use React, and honestly, I don't have time for that as a person. Like I'm just stop with that noise. Because more than anything else, it winds up intimidating new developers. So, find the framework that you like, dig into that, and then don't worry about the others until you get bored. And then you decide, hey, I want to go in and learn something else. So cool. Todd asked the question, how do I escape tutorial purgatory? So I'm going to guess that's, how do you take what it is that you've learned and turn it into something real? How do you make Pinocchio a real boy there? Again, I sort of go back to the go do something with it, like go build something. So rather than just walking through the tutorial, go, okay, I want this to exist and I'm going to build this. And then make that happen, and go from there. One of the other things that you can always do is, hang up a shingle, like go, become a contractor, like try and vend out your services. And granted, you're probably not going to get paid a whole heck of a lot when you first get started. Insist on getting paid. Always, always, always insist on getting paid. People should get paid for their work. But you could go in and find something. And one of the things that you're gonna find is that there's a lot of smaller organizations that are out there that are just in need of just like a little bit of web dev, that they just need something, and you can build something for them. Quite a very, very, very long time ago, I had a comedian friend of mine who wanted a website built. So I went ahead and built a website for him. I didn't, get a whole lot of money out of it, got a little bit, but I got, a bit of experience, in getting in and doing that. Is a junior web dev symptom that for now you don't want to learn another stack? You feel too comfortable with Python, Django, React, or is that understandable? Jose asked that question. That's totally understandable. And that's totally fine. Like there's nothing at all that's wrong with going in with one stack and just saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do. The one thing that I'm going to say though is definitely spend a little bit of time, at the very least, becoming familiar with other stacks or other languages, or at the very least understand that you very well may need to do that at some point in your career. That, I mentioned much earlier on that the number one key to somebody's success in this industry is their willingness to learn, is their passion to learn. That you cannot be static in this industry. You cannot simply go, hey, I'm going to learn this and then that's it. And the example that I always give, and this is not necessarily developer related, but it still tells the tale. So back in 99/2000 was when Windows 2000 came out, of course. And it was when Microsoft released Active Directory. And Active Directory was from the Microsoft perspective, a revolutionary way of setting up your networks. It was completely different from anything that had been done before. And so as a result, very few people knew how to do it, and everybody wanted to learn. And so what that meant was the people who knew how to do it and were trainers in the industry, so it was their role to get out and teach people, were able to, as contractors, charge quite a bit of money for doing that. Because again, there's a very high demand. Well, one of the things that happened, because it was going to happen at some point, because again, this was how you were going to be setting up your networks using Windows, so everybody needed to learn it, was that eventually a lot more people learned it. And so a lot more trainers learned how to do it. And so now both the demand started to drop and the supply started to increase. Economics 101 here, that as demand starts to drop and supply starts to increase, prices also start to drop. And so you had a lot of trainers back then that were just, a lot of just wailing and gnashing of teeth and just complaining about the fact that they were not able to charge the rates that they were once able to charge. And the reason that they weren't able to was because of the fact that what they had focused in on had become commoditized. That happens in this industry. Or languages change. That yes, absolutely, there'll still be this periodic spike in demand for COBOL developers. But by and large, I'm not going to tell somebody that they need to go learn COBOL because there's now not a demand for it. And in that case, it's just because nobody writes in COBOL anymore. So those types of things are going to happen where, it's either going to become commoditized or the industry is just going to change and the industry is just going to move away from something. So can you stay with Python, Django, React? And is it understandable to want to stay there? Absolutely, 100%. But what I am going to say is there is going to come a point in time when you are going to need to move beyond that 10 years from now, You're going to be telling old stories over whatever your alcoholic or non-alcoholic drink of choice happens to be about, boy, I remember 10 years ago when I was doing Python Django and it was the best thing. And, or better yet, you'll be talking about, like how challenging it was and how much simpler this new framework is that everybody is using. And, these kids these days, they just don't understand how good they've had it. Like that's going to become you 10 years from now. Just like, I will happily tell old stories about doing ASP development in VB script, or doing web form development in ASP.NET. And just like, people who are using Django, you don't know how good you have it, compared to what we had to do 10 or 15 years ago. And so 10 or 15 years from now, that's going to be you. You're going to be doing exactly that. So you're going to go gray and lose your hair and all of that. Okay, this is now getting a little too depressing. But eventually that's going to be you. So can you stay there? Sure, but just bear in mind that at some point you are going to need to change. And this is also again why I'm saying, it doesn't hurt to spend a weekend and go learn React or go learn Vue or go learn Angular, or go learn something else, because again, things are gonna change. Jasmine asked the question, am I familiar with Free Code Camp on the Odin project? I am not. So yeah, I cannot speak to that. Okay. Other questions? Or did I just make everybody depressed by saying, 20 years from now, everybody's going to have gray hair? Sort of pause here for just a moment, get another sip of coffee. Okay. Jose asked a question, have I ever wanted to write a book? The short answer to that question is yes, I have. The longer answer to that is I've never been able to. Like I've had a couple of offers, and one I said yes to, but I wound up having to back out of. That I just like getting a little bit personal here. I have ADHD, specifically the inattentive version, and so what that means is I will get super excited about something. I will want to be able to do something, and I don't always have the level of commitment to follow through on it. So the couple of opportunities that I've had to write a book, that's really what wound up getting in my way, was I just didn't have the ability to follow through on it. It's something that I still think about, and maybe sometime in the future I'll contribute a couple of chapters. But yeah, doing video is a form that I really like to do, and I like to do a lot of like shorter things, and that seems to work really well for me. So yeah. Soon asked the question, what's the biggest challenge when starting a first job as a web dev? And I would say almost just in general. I think there's a lot. And none of this is insurmountable. So I want to make sure that I'm very clear and highlighting the fact that, I don't, everything that's going to be put in front of you are surmountable challenges. So these are all things that you can absolutely overcome, but there's still going to be a little bit of a challenge. So I think the biggest challenge when starting a first job as a web developer is getting used to writing code in the real world. And I know that that's something that's bandied about quite a bit, but it is true, because you're going to, when you go to a boot camp or you go to a school or you're self-taught, you're going to learn syntax, you're going to learn a lot of best practices, you're going to learn how to do things. But once you get into the real world, now you need to learn how to contribute to a project. Now you need to learn how to be part of a team. Now you need to learn how to work with requirements. Now you need to learn how to follow along with whatever conventions it is that the team has set forth, and how to like fit in with that. And so I think that's really the biggest thing. Is it's not just the, hey, how do I create a site using React? It's now, how do I continue to build upon a site that's been built in React? And how do I deal with legacy code and all of those types of things? So I think that's really the biggest challenge, is making that move. And a lot of that, honestly, I think is just like a culture shift, because when you're in a boot camp, or you're in college, and especially if you're self-taught, the vast majority of the work that you're going to be doing is all going to be by yourself. And if you do have team projects, typically they're relatively small teams, so like 2 or 3 people. And so you're inherently going to, not only just like maybe pick up some bad habits, but you're also going to, not have to worry about like merging pull requests and things like that, because you typically don't do that on a solo-based project. It's something you should do, but that's not something that you typically do. So I think that's really the biggest challenge. But again, all of that is surmountable. It just takes a little bit of time. So for those first few months that you onboard at a company, be patient with yourself. That just allow yourself some time to just adjust to that. So yeah. Sabina asked the question, any thoughts on how to avoid developer burnout? Yes. Number 1, take vacations. And when I say vacations, I mean vacations. Disconnect. That when I go on a vacation, I completely disconnect from everything. And in fact, like the best example that I can give was my wife and I celebrated one of the anniversaries that we celebrated. I was about to say we celebrated an anniversary a while ago. Well, we've done that every year. So one of the anniversaries that we celebrated, we decided we were going to go off to Japan for 2 weeks. And what I did at that point was I literally uninstalled from my phone every single work app that I had. And I did bring a laptop, but I brought a personal laptop. And the only reason that I brought that was just so that way I could bring images down and do some light editing and things like that on the pictures that we took. But then that was it. And so I did not check email. I did not do anything like that. And then on top of that, when I got back to work, I deleted all emails that came in. True story. I deleted all emails. The only ones that I actually read were ones that came in from my manager, but otherwise I deleted everything else, because I also have this belief that if you go on vacation, returning from vacation should not be a punishment. I should not be punished by now having to go through 1,500 emails in my inbox. That does not make vacation, that does not make re-entry a pleasant experience. And so I delete all of my emails upon my return. So that's number 1, is take vacation. And when you do, disconnect, completely disconnect. Number 2 is do other things away from the computer. Now, I know that for a lot of developers, myself included, gaming is a big thing. I do Flight Simulator. I do Civilization 6. Those are basically my go-to games. So as a result, I do spend a lot of time in front of my computer. But I do have hobbies outside of my computer that there's a couple of TV programs that Karn and I watch. Karn's my wife, that Karn and I watch, and we do those types of things together. We love to travel. So again, getting out and doing those types of things. And so and on top of that, I run quite a bit, and running for me has probably been the best thing that's helped me with developer burnout, because it's one of the few things that allows my mind to settle. It allows me to actually do a lot of processing in life, and it gets me away from the computer. So I think that's basically it. Take vacations and have hobbies, do other things. I posted a quote. Let me see if I can't dig this up real quick in the background here. Let me see if yeah, here it is. And I'll just paste it in because I tweeted it. But it's from Sid Meier, who's a game designer. He designed Civ 6 among many other games. But whatever it is you want to be good at, you have to make sure you continue to read and learn and seek joy elsewhere, because you never know where inspiration will strike. And I think that that's important, not only again to avoid developer burnout, but also to become better at what it is that you want to do. So yeah. So do other things. Take vacations. So yeah. Fred mentions hard to focus. You have ADHD, have to watch videos 3 times to remember code for programming. Yeah, I agree completely. And there's an irony here that I do a lot of video content, but video content for me personally, as a way to learn, doesn't always work real well for me. It depends on what it is. If it's coding, I find I work much better with text-based. But if it's something like gaming, I find that I learn better by video, and it's really funny. So like I watch a lot of Flight Simulator videos. I watch a lot of there's somebody by the name of The Game Mechanic. I watch a lot of his Civ 6 videos, and that's the way that I learn how to get better at games. But for coding, I'm primarily text based. But yet I do a lot of video work. I don't know what it is, but yeah, I'm sort of I'm the actor that doesn't watch their own stuff. So yeah. So Todd asked the question, how do you deal with continually changing requirements from clients that change their mind every 2 to 3 days or every other week? Deep breaths. So, I have some empathy for requirements that change on a constant basis, because I'm honestly sort of that same way, that I don't always know how I want something to look until I see it. And because of the fact that that's the way that my brain operates, that really is then it really gives me the ability to have a bit of grace then for people who do change their mind every few days, because a lot of times they don't know what it is that they're looking for either. And on top of that, there's a certain level of, they don't necessarily know what's possible. So, when you go to somebody who's non-technical, you're very welcome, Sabina. When you go to somebody who's non-technical and you ask them to describe what it is that they want, they're doing so without truly understanding the space in which they're operating. And at the same time, they also don't necessarily understand the language that they're supposed to be speaking. And so it's really hard for somebody who's non-technical to explain what it is that they want. And so that's a big part of what leads to that type of churn is they don't know what it is that they really want because they don't know what it is that's possible. They don't know how to ask for what it is that they're looking for. And so it doesn't start to become more formed until they start to see it. And so, once you start to understand that, then it's like, oh, okay, cool. Let's start to steer into this. And so requirements gathering then becomes a much bigger thing. Like ask good questions, ask lots of questions, like spend a lot of time going through all of those different questions. So that if, as a perfect example, if I'm talking to somebody and I'm like trying to explain something to somebody and they're asking me a lot of very basic questions, then what they're really telling me at a meta level is I've failed at my job in trying to explain whatever it is that I'm trying to explain. That either I'm not communicating well enough, I'm not communicating in a way that they can understand, or maybe I have made too many assumptions about their level of knowledge, and I need to step it down a little bit. That I just need to thunk it down to a lower level. So, when I'm hearing those types of things, then that's what that's telling me. And so quite frequently, if my client is constantly changing their mind, then a lot of times what that's telling me is not only A, do they not necessarily understand what it is they're looking for, but also B, that's usually an indication that I haven't done a great job of asking them the right questions. I haven't equipped them with the tools that they need to be able to properly communicate with me. So that's a very big thing. So steer right into that. Spend a lot of time on doing requirements gathering. Number two, and this is of course a big part of what agile development was all about, is constantly be putting prototypes in front of the customer. And they don't necessarily have to be fully functional. They could just be, very basic prototypes. They could just be, screen drawings on a whiteboard, things like that. So, spend a lot of time doing that, especially early on, just a lot of back and forth to make sure that that you've understood them. And that you are in fact meeting their needs. And then on top of that, again, just it's part of the nature of what we do. So there is just a little bit of just deep breath, a little bit of meditation, go for a run, get out and do something else. So that's really it. So Fiction Free asked the question, what is Azure? Azure is our cloud-based platform. So, sort of like you have AWS for Azure or Watson for IBM, Azure is our cloud platform. And it's all encompassing for basically everything that we do on the cloud. So hosting VMs, websites, databases, virtual networking, whatever it is that you might want to do, you can do that inside of Azure. So it's our cloud platform. Cool. Other questions? So we've got a bit of time here, so I'm very happy to answer questions. I don't think I'm going to get into demos. I don't have a whole lot of time left, so I'm not going to worry too much about demos. So I think I'm just going to make this a full Q&A session, and we'll just go at it that way. So, yeah, other questions? should make sure I drink water. It's a good tip for everybody. Drink water. Stay hydrated. Other questions? I know there's got to be more out there. Devs I recommend to follow channels, blogs, Jose asks. Well, I'm certainly going to recommend the Microsoft Developer and Microsoft Reactor YouTube pages. So definitely recommend those. I really like... There we go. I really like C# Fritz. So definitely check him out. We do have a Microsoft Developer Twitch channel as well, which is definitely worth checking out. You can, of course, find me on Twitter. So shameless plug. And then... I mean, there's so many developers to follow. Gosh, I don't even know where to start. You know, hit me up on Twitter, and I'll gather a list there. So, but there's a whole bunch. So yeah. As far as blogs go. I honestly, there isn't a blog that I necessarily follow, just because I tend to do a lot of just like on demand of searching for things. So there isn't a blog that I necessarily follow, but there's a lot that I just find myself kind of going back to, just because when I do my search, you know, search engine just takes me to there. Yeah. Someone asked the question, do junior devs need to learn SaaS or Bootstrap? So two different things here. So SaaS is it's sort of like TypeScript for JavaScript. It's like, here's CSS and let's build upon CSS and give it features that it never had. Bootstrap is a framework. And it might, I think it uses SaaS. I cannot remember what it uses as well there. But Bootstrap is a framework. So I want to make sure that I differentiate those two. So as far as being a junior dev goes, I think you do need to know, on the framework side, you do need to know CSS. And you do need to know some UI framework. And so that could be Bootstrap, that could be Tailwind, that could be, there's a few others that are out there. But yes, so you do need to know some framework for display. I think Bootstrap is great because it's a really nice framework for just laying out pages. I use Bootstrap constantly, personally. So I would say yes, learn one of those frameworks. As far as SaaS goes, and I think less still exists, but I'm honestly not really sure. And that sort of answers the question on SaaS, that I think you can really get away without having to know that as a junior dev. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Jose asked the question, is it true that if you didn't answer the algorithm question, you can still be hired by big tech companies? So the answer to that is, I mean, yes, it's true that you can still get hired in. And I would highlight the fact that I don't think I've ever been asked the algorithm question. In a lot of ways, I've sort of cheated the Kobayashi Maru to go with a Star Trek example there, that I never got asked the algorithm question. The handful of times that I've had coding questions, fortunately, they've been very good. And the best that I remember, and this was so long ago, the company was really ahead of its time when it came to doing developer interviews, is they literally just put me into a room with a computer and gave me a requirement. Here's your application. Build as much as you can in an hour. Okay, cool. And so now I went in and I built the application inside of an hour, or at least built a good part of it within an hour. And that's fantastic, because it's now what I'm doing is I'm writing code. Now I'm being a developer, and that's what you're hiring. Is you're hiring a developer and asking them to write code, asking them to develop is how you can determine whether or not somebody is a good developer. Asking somebody algorithm questions is not going to tell you whether or not they're a good developer. It's why I really can't stand algorithm questions. So can you still answer them wrong, but get the job anyway? The answer to that is yes. And I would say all up, that the answer to that is generally yes for almost any interview question. That, one interview question in and of itself is not necessarily going to be the make or break moment for you. In fact, I shouldn't even say not necessarily. That I cannot imagine a question that I ask somebody and them not giving me a right answer would ever be a no. And on top of that, again, when I'm interviewing, and I'm going to speak to me personally, I also try to extend a fair bit of grace, and especially for new hires, because the interview process in and of itself is extremely stressful. And I know that. And so I'm always trying to make sure that I'm keeping that context in mind. So if somebody is not giving me the quote unquote right answer, but maybe they're getting close, or maybe I can see what their logic is, even though they're not necessarily getting to the right answer, then one of two things will happen. Either A, I'll go, oh, okay, I know that they can do it, but they're just a little bit nervous, or B, because, and this is true at a lot of different companies, that you go through a series of interviews. So you'll talk to 3, 4, 5 different people, is that I'll make a note to whoever it is that's going to be talking to this person a little bit later. And I'll go, hey, I'm not 100% certain about their skill at this, and ask them to follow up on that. Which, by the way, your little bit of interview tip here is, if you're going through that type of an interview where you're talking to multiple people and you keep hearing the same question over and over and over again, sometimes it's because, it's just a stock question and people will just keep asking the same question. But sometimes it's because they're trying to get a little bit more from you, that maybe something that you had said earlier, that maybe it wasn't as in-depth as they were hoping, or maybe it wasn't quite what they were expecting. And so they're just like giving you another opportunity to follow up on that. So that's a little bit of a clue that you might want to just pause for another moment and go, okay, let me just think about this answer before you actually answer it. So yeah, so very long-winded answer there, but long and short of it, if you don't answer the algorithm question correctly, can you still get hired? The answer is yes. Yeah. So Brandon says, what can I say about Microsoft seemingly increasing support of Linux in the Linux Foundation? If I remember right, Azure servers are all Linux-based. So honestly, I don't know what the Azure servers themselves are running on. I believe that they're Windows, but again, do not quote me on that. I do not know with 100% certainty. But I think, a big part, I think that there's a lot to this answer. And all of this is Christopher Harrison opinion. None of this is Microsoft opinion. All of this is Christopher Harrison opinion. I think a lot of it is partly because, this is just development in the real world, that full Linux shops, full Windows shops, full Mac shops, they really don't exist. That there's always some level of hybrid that, even the most Windows-centric company is still going to have some level of Linux, and even the most Linux-centric company is still going to have some level of Windows. That this is just development in the real world, and it's also just like how modern development is done, a lot more open source and so forth. And so this is very much just like what we've embraced. That this is the market, this is the real world, and this is now where we are. And so that includes increasing support for Linux, like WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux, which literally allows me to run Linux as part of Windows. I mean, it's truly mind-blowing. But again, it's how development is done. That if we're talking about Python, if we're talking about Node, both of those are very much Linux first. They're not Windows first. And so it's very much hey, let's meet developers. Let's meet people where they're at. So if you're going to write Linux, fantastic. We can help you with that, and so we're going to give you the tooling that you need, and we're also going to offer you the hosting that you need as well. So it's your code, it's your solutions, and then our cloud that we're happy to host whatever it is that you happen to be running. So yeah. Todd asked the question, what are my thoughts on ML AI with web development? Would it be good to learn ML AI in addition to web dev to stay with the trends of today? Again, if you're ever going to ask me, should I learn X? My answer to that question is always going to be yes. That should you spend a little bit of time learning something? The answer is yes, because again, it's going to broaden your horizons, and you're going to learn things that you might be able to bring back and apply to what it is that you're already doing. Oh, you're very welcome, Brandon. Learn AI, learn ML. That I've spent a bit of time in that space. I know some of our different cognitive services, our different AI services. I've spent a little bit of time in ML and played around in there. And it's nice to know those things, because eventually you're going to come across a problem where you go, hey, you know what? This would be a great place for me to use this. And the only way that you're going to be able to truly answer that question, the only way that you're going to be able to know those things, is if you have some level of understanding of the tools that are available. That if I just simply, hand you a toolbox and you just open it up and you go, oh, okay, so there's a whole bunch of tools in there, you're not necessarily going to then know which tool might be useful for a particular job. But if you open up the toolbox and at the very least you give a cursory glance to the tools that are in there, and maybe you pick up a monkey wrench and you play around a little bit with that, and you see like how the dials work and so forth, then that might trigger something in your head, and you might go, hey, later on that there's something over here. That tool right there, that could go ahead and work there. And so having that little bit of knowledge is going to help you out. And it also helps you avoid that old saying of, if the only tool that you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. There's actually a name for this. I read the Wikipedia article on it a while ago, and I cannot remember what the name of it is. But yeah, that if the only tool that you have is React, if the only tool that you have is Angular, then everything's going to look like a nail, and you're going to very quickly learn not everything is a nail. So knowing at least a little bit about other things is going to be very important. And then you also mentioned staying ahead of the trends of today. The other thing that I would mention here real quick is there's obviously a lot of interest in ML AI, and there's a lot of interest in things like blockchain, and there's a lot of interest in containers. But at the same time, there's also still a a long list of failed technologies in the past, or maybe I shouldn't say failed, but at the very least, technologies that aren't used anymore. So that, like, soap and WSDL used to be a thing back for anybody who remembers doing web services long before we just started doing everything with JSON and stopped doing things with XML. At the time, XML and SOAP and web services description language, which is what WSDL is, and dynamically discovering services and things like that was all the rage. And it was all the rage for about a year. And then it stopped being the rage, and then we moved on to other things. And so there's always a little bit of that. And so what I always suggest, and you've heard me say this numerous times, is like, get in and learn about something. Get in and play with things, because you're gonna at the very least learn about that technology, and again, it might help you in the future. That again, I might need that tool later, but also B, is that it's still going to potentially help you with whatever it is that actually does catch on later on. So when we started going to all JSON all the time, and REST became a thing and all of that, my experience with SOAP and with WSDL still helped me out there, so that even though we're not using those technologies anymore, again, in a lot of ways, there's nothing new under the sun. Knowing what it was knowing the problems that those technologies were trying to solve, and knowing how it was that they were trying to solve it, helped me out. So even if ML AI, changes completely, or the tools that we're using today become completely different tomorrow, still knowing how they worked today is going to help you out tomorrow, even if it doesn't necessarily become the next big thing. So yeah, got a little bit of time left. Other questions? Drink water, Christopher. Drink water. Oh, you're very welcome, Todd. One of the things I always have to remember when I'm streaming is there's quite a bit of delay between when I say or do something and when it finally reaches everybody. So I always need to remember that. So, any other questions? Catherine asked a question, have we been doing more remote hires? The short answer to that question is yes. And especially because all of our interns were remote this past summer. I don't know what it's going to look like going forward. But at the very least, remote hires are becoming more common. And on top of that, remote work in general, even post-pandemic, is going to become more common. Now, a lot of that is still team by team and culture by culture. That you are going to find some teams that are a little bit more, hey, we kind of want you here. There's some teams that are a bit more willing to go remote hire. But I would say, as a general rule, remote hires have become much more common than they have in the past, and that's something I do not foresee changing. Again, keep in mind, opinion of Christopher Harrison here. Plyplop asked the question, I'm sure this has been asked before, but how do I conquer imposter syndrome? And it hasn't been asked, at the very least, on this on this chat, and my answer is, as soon as I figure out how, I will let you know. It's tough, and it's certainly something that I struggle with, and honestly, it's something that I'll even struggle with when I'm presenting, that I will have times where I'll be presenting a topic. I'll be presenting a topic that I know really well, and it might be a presentation that I've done numerous times. So like, I know exactly where to hit all of my demos. I know the exact points that I want to make. I know where it is that I'm going to be putting in my jokes, and I know that I'm getting the laughs at the right times, and all of that. Like, all of that will be going flawlessly, and yet still in my head, every now and then I will get this inner voice of just, you're boring everybody. You're not doing a great job, and it's awful. And there's this musical, and bear in mind that there's a lot of language and so forth in this if you decide to ever go track it down. So you have been warned. But there was this musical that was on Broadway for a hot second called Title of Show that I love dearly. And there's one song in there called Die Vampire Die. Again, adult language. You've been warned if you decide to go look it up. But there's this song Die Vampire Die, and it's focused really around creating art. But I think that there's a lot that can be applied to really just sort of anybody in general, and it's about not listening to all of those voices. And the biggest one that it focuses in on is that internal voice, that if somebody was telling you all of those terrible things, you would immediately just discount them. But when it's the voice inside of your head, it's the voice of reason. And it's a terrible thing, and everybody has that. And so a big part of it is just like acknowledging that, and in a lot of ways of just like die vampire die, of just saying, hey, this is not the truth. Part of it is just plowing through whatever it is that you're trying to do. Part of it is just in your brain, even if you think you're faking it, just keep faking it until you make it. Like, just keep paddling away below the water while the top of your body maintains stillness. Like, just keep powering through that. And I think the other big thing is listen to the positive feedback. That one of the things that a lot of people do, and I find myself doing this quite a bit, is somebody will say, hey, that was a great presentation. And my immediate internal response will be to discount it, where I'll go, thanks, but that it was, oh, this is something I've done numerous times, or oh, it's not really all that complicated, or whatever it is. Stop doing that. That if somebody tells you that you've done something well, say thank you. And say thank you unequivocally, and acknowledge the fact that somebody has taken the time to go, hey, you did something well, and recognized that, and recognize that yourself, that you've done something well. And so try to let those voices win out. Try to let those be the ones that take over your brain, rather than the voice inside your head that's telling you you're terrible, that you'll never be good enough. So that's the way that I try to approach it. As soon as I figure out how to truly conquer it, I will let you know. I don't know that that's something that anybody has conquered. So yeah. Cool. All right. It's just about 11 o'clock. So I want to first of all thank everybody for tuning in and checking out the stream. It was great to just chat with everybody. That as I mentioned at the top of it, back now just about 2 hours ago that this was a little bit of a one-off, and I wanted to be able to take advantage of the fact that we have this 1 week here, and next week we're going to be offline, and then the week after that we'll pick back up with our normal programming, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. And so we had this 1 week in the middle, and it was like, a little bit ago we had a great conversation about like careers and things like that. So why not just do that? And so here we are, and we did that. And so this was wonderful. And we'll try and do a style like this again in the future. I hope that you all enjoyed it. I know I had a fantastic time chatting with everybody, and yeah, thank you for that. On a normal week, what we do is we build things, and specifically we build things around web dev. And the approach is very much the approach of a developer. And so you're going to see me write live code. You're going to see me debug. You're going to see me look things up. You're going to see answers come in through chat. That it really is, hey, this is the developer experience. This is how developers learn. So let's just do that. And it's been a lot of fun, and it's really given us the opportunity to build something across multiple weeks. And so we're going to be, as Mallory highlighted there, our next stream is going to be January 28th at 9 o'clock. And you can find the link, code and coffee there. And Mallory, if you want to throw in the link to the into the meetup as well, that would be greatly appreciated. I don't have that handy, but yeah, you can go ahead and check that out. And you're going to notice a lot of this, that a lot of it is just like having little bits of conversation and so forth. It'll be much more dev focused, but we'll definitely still have a lot of conversation and things like that. So yeah, so thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Plop Plop. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Swin. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name there. This was certainly a lot of fun. Please do feel free to hit me up on Twitter. If I can type out Twitter, there we go. There we go. Yeah, so feel free to hit me up on Twitter. You can find me there. I'm always happy to answer whatever questions it is that I possibly can. And I think the biggest takeaway from everything is very much this: is if you want to learn how to write code, the answer is write code. That get in and do something with it. Like find whatever it is that that you want to write, give yourself a little project and go forth and do it. That's very much it. And in a couple weeks, I'll be doing something with TypeScript and React, and you can check that out. There's the meetup page. Thank you to Mallory. Yeah. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Again, not around next week, but the week after that, which is the 28th, 9 a.m. Pacific. I think that's 5 p.m. UTC. Yes, it is 5 p.m. UTC. Yeah, so 1700 UTC, and then whatever other time zones are out there as well. So yeah, so thank you again to everybody,